It's 12 o'clock.
Sorry, guys.
It's 12 o'clock and there's still a pandemic.
Newsflash.
Hi, Sanait.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. On behalf of the Urban Health Institute, the Office of the President, and our Department of Urban Public Health at Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science, we wanted to welcome you to our monthly Dr. M. Alfred Haynes lecture series. My name is Dr. Kiosha Partlow. I am going to have the pleasure of introducing our speakers and also our moderators. Really quickly, I wanted to say that this important lecture series is named in honor of Dr. M. Alfred Haynes, who is President Emeritus and former Dean of the College of Medicine at CDU. And he dedicated his life and career to social justice. And he really showed us that you can be a public health professional and also advocate for social justice. It didn't have to be separate. They can be certainly one and the same. And this talk today is certainly in that spirit. We're going to be having an important conversation on fractured solidarity. Anthony Clayton Johnson, and also Dr. Bita Amani. This highlights, sorry if you can go back one, our agenda is highlighted here. Our guests will be framing abolition, providing some history, discussing more about defunding the police and what that means. They'll be talking about policing and the pandemic and those important aspects. And then also we'll move toward talking about action, what to do moving forward, especially as current and future health professionals. And then we'll end by questions from the audience. If you have not already done so, please remember to mute your lines and feel free to use the chat box as we discuss today. So I'll be first introducing Mark Anthony Clayton Johnson, who is a licensed acupuncturist. He's also a seasoned organizer from Los Angeles. He's a founder of Frontline Wellness Network, which is a network of healthcare providers working tirelessly to end incarceration and also criminalization through action-oriented political education. And then in addition, we're also joined by Dr. Bita Amani, who is an associate professor at CDU. She's based in the Department of Urban Public Health. By training, she's a sociopolitical epidemiologist, and she's really dedicated her career as well to exploring the multiple ways that our criminal justice system creates and institutionalizes public health crises. She's, among other roles, many of her roles, she is a founding board member of Frontline Wellness Network, and she's also co-chair of the COVID-19 Racism and Equity Task Force at UCLA, the Center for Study of Racism, Social Justice, and Health. Finally, this discussion is moderated by Sana Abbasi, who is a CDU student, and she's also former student body president for our CDU student government. She has a background in refugee and migrant work. She's also a tireless advocate for social justice, heavily involved in advocacy and work on behalf of underserved and under-resourced. And she's also coordinator for UHI. So I'll go ahead and hand it on over to you, Sana, to moderate our discussion today. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Partlow. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Thank you, Dr. Amani and Mark Anthony. We're really excited to have you. So, Mark, let's start off by having you frame abolition for us. Can you explain that more in depth, I would say?
Definitely. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank y'all for hosting this conversation. And I'm really excited that we get to have these conversations, particularly in these moments where there's tremendous action that is happening, but also, it's a really important time to get grounded in the ideas that's motivating the action. And so, as was named, I'm a healthcare provider that very much sees abolition as part of my healthcare work. And I want to talk a little bit about what that is, but to give us a little ground, I want to talk about just kind of why health is political. And I'm just going to share my screen real quick so folks can follow me here. So what I really want to say here is, there's a lot of questions around what abolition is. And I really start from the place around just grounding ourselves in what the politics of this moment are. And, we're really, really exciting moment, a really tremendous moment, a really groundbreaking moment where the call to defund police is moving across the country. And the fact that that's a reality is not a given. It's taken a long time. It's taken at least the last 7 years and definitely over the last decade of organizing in Los Angeles County, where we've made very clear decisions to see the work that we're doing as a part of a political struggle. And part of that work includes getting healthcare providers engaged. I've been doing this work against the jails to stop jail construction for a very long time, almost a decade. And when Los Angeles County first approved a $4.5 billion jail plan, there were no healthcare providers who were challenging it, even though they were saying, the county was saying, this was the healthiest step for Los Angeles County to build a mental health treatment facility, even though we know that people do not get well in jails, they do not get well in prisons, that punishment does not produce well-being or safety for our communities. And so we started the Frontline Wellness Network to make an intervention. And one of those interventions is trying to help providers understand that our work is political. And what I mean by that is when power and ideology converge to move an agenda. And it's really critical for us that we understand and are able to diagnose any particular action we take, any particular action that our targets take, by understanding the power that is being used, the ideas and the values behind that power, and the agenda, the goal of that. And just to be clear about what we mean by ideology, we mean a set of ideas and values that explain how society works, as well as how society should work. And so we all have various ideologies. We all are informed by various ideologies. And when we function off a very deliberate and intentional decision to choose the values and choose the ideas that undergird the reality we want to see, then we can move a agenda forward that is for our people and for people who historically experience state violence and incarceration. And so I say this because there are historic examples of healthcare providers wielding their power to leverage harmful ideologies and moving forward harmful agendas. At the same time, there has never been a moment in US history where healthcare providers, health workers, nurses, herbalists, doctors, acupuncturists, whatever it may be, did not throw down in abolitionist movements, did not throw down in movements that were geared towards very, very radical reimaginings and shifts of society. And so knowing that, I hope that's an invitation to all of us to throw down in abolitionist movements, to continue to throw down for folks who are already in that space, and to continue to sharpen ourselves. And we can trace a line from the very rich anti-Black history of this country, trace a line through which medical providers have taken the opposite side, have taken the anti-Black oppressive side of history, and have drawn a line from that all the way up to today, where we see George Floyd has sparked another moment of rebellion. We can draw that line from folks like Dr. Samuel Cartwright, who coined the diagnosis drapetomania, which essentially many of you I'm sure know. This is the idea that the African desire for freedom was a form of psychosis, right? And we always situate these things within political agenda. You're seeing a doctor, referring back to our definition of politics, who is using their power, the power of their authority, the power to develop a diagnosis, their power within a discipline, to move forward an agenda that is clearly about protecting slavery, and is rooted in the ideology of white supremacy. And it is not unique to this moment. It's not unique to the moment of slavery where we see these type of things happen. There were plenty of examples of this. And so these things are also really timely. They're always in conversation with what other forces are moving in the world, right? This diagnosis was coined not long before the US Civil War, right? Where the fundamental assumption that slavery had to be was called into question. And so we're always assessing the agenda. At the same time, we can draw a line from there and from a doctor who blamed Black people for their own harm and their own oppression, to the doctor that did the autopsy report of George Floyd, and very much showed us that racist and anti-Black history still exists, right? This is a doctor who, as you can see, said that George Floyd did not die of strangulation. He died because of his own inherent underlying health conditions. He died because of his own cardiac condition, hypertension, and had nothing to do with the fact that several police officers had a knee on his neck, knees on his back. And so we trace that history, and we say that at any given moment, our field is being used to advance an anti-Black agenda, an anti-Black set of values, an anti-Black power, an anti-Black politic, or it is used to move an abolitionist politic. And so I want to ground us in a definition of abolition. Abolition is a political ideology, and we just talked about what that is. And a theory of change. It is a way of changing our society that is not simply about dismantling carceral systems, jails, prisons, detention centers, hospitals that put people in cages, but visioning and building a society that sustains the dignity and well-being of historically oppressed communities. It is rooted in Black liberation. It is rooted in the abolition of slavery, the abolition of lynching, the abolition of Jim Crow, the abolition of incarceration in the prison industrial complex as we know it. And it's not only about tearing things down. It's not only about divesting from harmful systems. It's investing in things that work. It's investing in systems that sustain and affirm Black life. And it's about changing the way, changing the way we relate to each other. And so it is certainly interpersonal. And so when we talk about fractured solidarity and what it means to have a fractured solidarity within the healthcare system, the call for us as abolitionists is to say that we, in order to be in solidarity with our clients, with our patients, we have to see that they are more than the physiology, more than the body, more than the person that sits in front of us in the clinic and in the treatment room, but they are a body that is in constant relationship to broader systems, constant relationship to systems outside of the treatment room, that their health is a product of political agendas that are constantly being waged on their bodies. And therefore we need to step out into those spaces and really demand systemic change outside of the treatment room. So that's how I want to ground us in this conversation as we talk about abolition. And I'm gonna pass it to Bita to walk us through some of the more concepts, some more of the concepts to help us ground us in this politic.
So I'm going to, sorry, let me get this out of the full screen mode. I actually want to add something to the point that Mark Anthony was making around tracing the history of what some would call scientific racism, or what Professor Dorothy Roberts calls racial science, and the idea that we're always looking for biological or biomedical or technological, both answers and solutions to things that we make because of how we believe people should relate to each other. For many here on the call, you're familiar with the work of Dr. Richard Allen Williams. And in response to this autopsy that came out around George Floyd's death, he wrote a letter to the editor of the New York Times. And in it, he said, "I was personally involved with a controversial chokehold in the 1980s in Los Angeles when 16 young men, 12 of whom were Black, died over the course of several months after being subjected to the suppressive, barbaric police tactic. In an attempt to obtain medical support for his outrageous declaration that Black men had died because of an anatomical anomaly in their neck arteries, LA Police Chief Daryl Gates, who authorized his police to use the chokehold, consulted me because I had written a book, The Textbook of Black-Related Diseases, which focused on differences in the medical experience between Blacks and whites and the need to recognize that Blacks have special healthcare needs. He assumed that I would corroborate his contention that Blacks were somehow anatomically different from whites and that a deficiency in their neck arteries was the real cause of their death, a theory which I vehemently refuted in a press conference." So to think that, like, one of, Dr. Richard Allen Williams is a very, very important figure here in CDU history as well. To think that, that what we are seeing in 2020 is also something that we have been seeing, right, over the last 400 years, then forces us to examine a system which many people are recognizing as a system that believes that harm needs to be done to correct a harm, right? And this is what takes us to abolition, and specifically, really, the only thing I want to add to what Mark Anthony said is that abolition, as both something that's trying to take down and dismantle what already exists, right, also has that whole part of what creating and adding, thinking about what we want to build up, and that it's described as a theory of change. And if we take the charge of Mark Anthony's charge that we should think about our health work as political health work, then it becomes a public health theory of change, right? It also then becomes a conceptual framework out of which we can think about both how to analyze and assess where the problems are, and then also to strategize around solutions. This slide here just takes us to the Black feminist Bell Hooks, who over 20 years ago said, "White supremacy has taught him that all people of color are threats, irrespective of their behavior. Capitalism has taught him that at all costs property can and must be protected. Patriarchy has taught him that his masculinity has to be proved by the willingness to conquer fear through aggression." We are, in this moment, which is a continuation of so many moments, built upon a foundation of anti-Black racism that sees white supremacy, capitalism, and heteronormative patriarchy coming together, causing us to then question pushing us to then question what are systems of power, what are their structures, ideologies, racial roots, how are they interconnected, and what do they have to do with people's health? Next slide, please. So what I have here, because I know that we can't cover everything, and that right now policing is definitely something on everyone's mind, as well as knowing what the history of policing is. Here are 5 books that I think are excellent places to start, to, regardless of where your knowledge is on it, each of them offers a really valuable perspective. We're going to start with Dr. Khalil Gibran Muhammad's book, The Condemnation of Blackness, Race, Crime, and the Making of Modern Urban America. In this book, he connects the history of policing to slave patrols. Mark Anthony, you talked about Samuel Cartwright and drapetomania and that diagnosis. It directly shows how policing was connected to trying to maintain plantation life, specifically in how to make sure that people of African descent who had been enslaved, right, would continue to be in a position of enslavement at the service of not only plantation owners, but plantation wealth, as well as the wealth of the United States. So he connects that history so that we can see how policing today is very much rooted in that. In City of Inmates, Dr. Kelly Little Hernandez takes us through how in Los Angeles, being one of the carceral capitals of the world, which Mark Anthony will get into later on, why activism and organizing in LA is so essential, right, to a global kind of decarceration, right? That in Los Angeles, policing converges around not only around anti-Black racism, but also brings into a Native genocide, as well as wanting to control and exploit the labor of Latinx folks. Then in the end of policing, Alex Vitale takes us through, why all the arguments around why we need policing are false, how they're rooted in these assumptions that don't really know what happens, in policing, what police do, and also how it's very necessary for us to know this because we need to imagine another world. Badges Without Borders, How Global Counterinsurgency Transformed American Policing, helps us to understand why is it that when in Ferguson, right, we ended up seeing tanks on the street, right, police officers with gear that we would have thought belonged to the military. He takes us through the history of how U.S. imperial kind of agendas in other parts of the world where police from the United States and Los Angeles and New York, right, went overseas to train police over there, how they also then trained in tactics that they brought home to use on people, specifically in this current context against Black Lives Matter activists. And in Policing the Planet, why the policing crisis led to Black Lives Matter, this important text through a series of essays brings our attention to the different shapes of policing across different locales, but how at its root, it is around race thinking and maintaining power, power, privilege, and property for for a few by limiting the opportunities of others. Next, please. So inevitably, when we're talking about these things, people always ask about crime, right? We cannot talk about issues of incarceration and policing without getting to the core of this. So what I offer here is a quote from Ruth Wilson Gilmore from her book, Golden Gulag, Prison, Surplus, Crisis, and the Opposition in Globalizing California, where she takes this straight on. And she says, but what about crime? Doesn't prison exist because there are criminals? Yes and no. While common sense suggests a natural connection between crime and prison, what counts as crime in fact changes, and what happens to people convicted of crimes does not, in all times and places, result in prison sentences. Defined in the simple terms of the secular state, crime means a violation of the law. Laws change depending on what in a social order counts as stability and who in a social order needs to be controlled. In it, she shows us the evidence from 1960 to 2005 that show that as crime rates were stable, what you see is that prison building in California was out of control. So that there is no relationship between crime and prison building. And if there is one, which we'll see later on, it's that the expansion of the prison coming at the cost of other resources, which are vital for any community to have stability, that is what produces crime. So the building of the prisons, right, can be connected to crime, but not crime connected to the building of prisons, which is a very important concept. Next slide, please. And so then this gets us back to then what Mark Anthony was saying about a foundation of anti-Black racism in this country. And then for us to think about then what is white supremacy? White supremacy is a system of power that has politically, economically, and culturally dominated globally for over 500 years, with a very particular insidious history here in the United States for the last 400, right? As a carceral system, it has amassed and maintained its power through the institutionalization and normalization of violence and the theft and exploitation of humans and land. We as a discipline, public health, we have pushed back on trying to just measure things on the individual level. We have said measure it on the institutional level, measure it on the societal level, but anti-Black racism exists on the civilizational level. This is a level out of which then we have kind of collective agreements, right? None of us here would agree on it, but there are collective agreements on what is knowledge, what is reality, and what are our values. Next slide, please. Here are some other texts that I refer you to that I think are very foundational to this conversation we're having around racism and its role today. The top one is Fatal Invention: How Science, Politics, and Big Business Recreate Race in the 21st Century. Dorothy Roberts is a JD and a professor at, I believe it's UPenn. And in this amazing book, she wrote, "Race is a political system that governs people by sorting them into social groupings based on invented biological demarcations." In it, she is really challenging us as a discipline, as a health science discipline, to think about how we have tried to make theories of racial difference based on biology, completely misreading that race was invented as a political project, right? Racism invented race. To understand more about what's going on, especially in the kind of larger conversation around policing and incarceration, really in the very insidious ways that protesters are labeled as either being violent or not violent or peaceful, or in the ways that nationally we try to justify whether somebody's death is worth it or not, right? These things come out of ideas of abstract liberalism, thinking that everything can be understood by only looking at the individual, naturalizing power differentials between people, still holding on to ideas of cultural racism, that if a group of people are acting in a certain way, it's because of their culture. So moving from biology to culture, and then also the minimization of racism, the role that it plays in society. Next slide, please. So Ruth Wilson Gilmore also offers us another definition of race that I think is a public health definition. In it, she says, racism specifically is a state-sanctioned or extra-legal production and exploitation of group differentiated vulnerability to premature death. And if we look at incarceration only and all the evidence that comes out of it, we see how true this is. On this slide, I have three data from 3 studies. The first one was by Professor Wilderman, and he compared the United States to other countries around the world, and looking at mass incarceration, specifically from 1981 to 2007. And in it, he concluded that the US life expectancy would have increased from 74 to 79 years if it had not been for mass incarceration, right, in the United States. In another study, Professor Evelyn Patterson concludes when looking at New York State parole data that for prisoners incarcerated in New York State, each year that they were incarcerated resulted in a 2-year reduction in their life expectancy, right? So that they had, for 5 years in prison, 1 point, they had increased odds of death by 78%, and 2, a reduced life expectancy at the age of 30 by 10 years. The image on the left is of a study that shows the dramatic likelihood of an increase in death for prisoners who are released from prison. Also drawing our attention to a potential very important place for public health intervention, which is to get resources to those who are being released, and then more importantly, going upstream and just not having anyone incarcerated to begin with. Next slide. And this is the last one that I will do here. In this, this shows us data from $1 Million Hoods, a project that Dr. Kelly Little Hernandez has out of UCLA, which shows the disproportionate arrest rates of those who are houseless compared to the total population. Essentially, what this draws our attention to in the map below is that the most arrests that are happening in Los Angeles County are happening within 50 blocks of Skid Row. We are literally arresting people in this county and making money off of arresting them because they do not have a place to live, right? Once again, drawing our attention to the roots and assumptions that are embedded within this. What other statistic can prove the point that this is about protecting property and ability for white movement and white freedom, right? The data on the right draws our attention to, and Mark Anthony will get into this later because this is a project that he actively has here with our CDU students on campus, that as we move towards a more abolitionist vision of decarceration, we also have to be mindful that that decarceration has racial equity embedded within it. So we're not just talking about decarcerating in general, but we're also watching the disproportionality. Because as this data shows, that while there has been decrease in arrest and incarceration of youth in Los Angeles County over the last, say, 5 years, that the benefits of this have not been fully appreciated for the Black youth of LA County. And then I'm just gonna stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Amani. So over to you, Mark. I have a question. Why is this moment different right now? Why is this moment unique? What is our trajectory? And what are your thoughts on mass incarceration? I know you've done a lot of work on and with mass incarceration, so whatever you can answer.
For sure. I'm gonna just kind of share my screen again. And I think speaking to why this moment is different, this is a screenshot from an action we had this past Saturday, where we had almost 500 folks, mostly healthcare workers in their scrubs and their white coats, coming out and marching on the Los Angeles County jail system, calling for the defunding of the sheriffs, but also calling for the closure of the jails. And I think this represents one example of why this moment is different. I mean, what I will say, and what I think is important for us as healthcare providers to be aware of, is organizing has got us to this point. On the moment when George Floyd was murdered, no one woke up and said, oh my God, racism is bad. And that was the moment. But it was the decades of organizing, and certainly the organizing that has been done since Mike Brown was also murdered in Ferguson, of organizations on the ground that have been setting the tone, that have been doing direct actions, that have helped people see that law enforcement continues to suck up budgets, continues to suck up resources that should be used for other things. As you can see in this picture, they got more PPE than some of our own nurses on the front lines. And so, you know, we have to be challenging some of the basic assumptions. And so the fact, what makes this moment different is that people are calling for the defunding of police. We have seen reforms. We have tried prosecutions. We have tried coming up with new use of force standards. We have tried body cameras. We have tried mandating that sheriffs don't shoot at moving vehicles. For every reform we have tried, we can point to an example where law enforcement acted in direct rejection of that reform. Certainly across the country, and definitely here in Los Angeles. And for all the reasons that Bita has lifted up, we're talking about a system that is not just the ways in which buildings function or computers talk to each other or anything like that. What we're talking about is ideology that functions at the speed of synapse, in which people are ready to harm Black folks despite their training, despite whatever threat of retaliation or threat of accountability. That's what we are dealing with. And so this moment is different because people are calling for something much more fundamental. And I think that's what's most encouraging about this moment. And it's necessary for Los Angeles because, as you can see in this action, we're shutting down the intersection on Boucher and Vignes, calling for the county to defund the sheriff's department and defend Black life. And we're right there in front of Men's Central Jail, which is very much the symbol of incarceration in Los Angeles County. It should be known that LA is the largest jail system on the planet. And this is post-COVID-19, right? COVID-19 shut down our economies. It created an opportunity for us to point out the public health crisis of incarceration of facilities that were never designed to produce well-being, that were never designed to prevent disease. In fact, they were designed to produce the opposite. They were designed to produce trauma, exacerbate disease. And that's what we're seeing right now as Los Angeles County's jail system has over 5,000 people on quarantine due to COVID-19 today. And what we did starting in March is immediately call for people to be released from the county jails. And because of COVID-19, because we said the safest place for anyone to be in the midst of pandemic is home, in their home. And if they don't have a home, the county needs to find a home for that person immediately and get them out of the jails. And we were successful in getting over 5,000 people out of the jail system. So we moved from 17,000 folks in the county jails to roughly 12,000 people in the county jails. And we are still the largest jail system in the country. Twin Towers Jail is still the largest mental health system in the country. And so the relevance of this in Los Angeles is really critical because in this moment, we have an opportunity where there are 5,000 more empty beds to actually close jail facilities, to actually close Men's Central, to defund the sheriffs by hundreds of positions, and move those resources into the things that actually work: community-based treatment, outreach workers, mental health outreach workers, street medics, housing, permanent supportive housing, and the like. What I also want to call attention to is the function, theoretically, the function of a jail is that it's supposed to be a place that houses people who are legally innocent, who have not been convicted of any crime. And what we've been saying is that obviously, whether you were convicted of a crime or not, no one should be subjected to COVID-19. So we need to be getting people out. But also there's a very arbitrary nature to which pretrial detention works in Los Angeles. And we have to move very quickly to get people out of the pretrial context in LA. You'll notice that in California, $37.5 million across 6 counties was spent housing people in jails for cases that were either dismissed or never filed. That's a lot of money that could have been used to invest in people's housing, invest in people's well-being, invest in people's care, invest in training people to recognize mental health emergencies when they're showing up and get ahead of it, right? You'll notice that Los Angeles is not on this list because their data is whack, right? That's why they weren't on this list. Human Rights Watch did this study, and they couldn't produce valuable data that we could meaningfully use in the study. And you should have known that Human Rights Watch has done a lot of work on this as part of our local Justice LA coalition, and we're pushing Los Angeles County, which has bail amounts 5 times the national average. And just to say, when we're talking about bail, we're talking about if you are arrested for allegedly committing a crime, you are held in jail and a judge gives you a bail amount that says you cannot get out of jail and fight your case unless you pay X amount of dollars. The average bail amount in Los Angeles County is over $50,000, and no one has that type of money. And yet we're seeing here that many of the people who were housed pre-trial had their cases dismissed. And we're not just talking about minor charges. We're talking also about felonies. We're talking about almost 500,000 people, almost a third of the people who've been housed in California between 2011 and 2015 for felonies were never convicted. And part of what we also know in addition to this is 70% of people who fight their case outside of jail, who are bailed out and fight their cases outside of the jail, are given time served or have their charges dropped. And so this is an arbitrary system that is invested in housing Black people, Black and brown people generally, in these systems. And so what we are saying is that we actually have to close these systems which continue to suck resources away from our people's lives and invest in dignity and well-being of our folks. And we have more possibility to do that than we've ever had. Now, why do we have more possibility? Because the pandemic of COVID-19 has laid bare the public health crisis of incarceration, as I talked about before, and that on top of a rebellion across the country calling for the defunding police is presenting some very unique conditions in which we can make some major wins happening. We're already seeing New York call for the city council calling for $1 billion moved away from the New York Police Department's budget. And they are currently in debates around how to do that right now. Again, that's because organizing has been happening for years around this. And we also know that Los Angeles City is in a similar debate. And we see that the mayor has offered up the number of $250 million, the city council $150 million, moving from the Los Angeles Police Department into communities of color, into Black communities specifically, right? And so there is a really critical opportunity that we have, a really critical moment where we have the moment to use our power to fight for the world that we want to see, a world that is about dignifying, protecting the lives of Black people, and to move a defund agenda forward. That is the politics of this moment that people are calling for. We have yet to see Los Angeles County take a stance, and folks know that county and city are different, right? The city is LAPD, and that's the city council and the mayor. The county is a board of supervisors who govern the county, and that's the sheriff's department. That's who does patrol and also runs and operates the jails. And so the county has yet to say that we're going to defund the sheriffs. Amidst all this national success, we're also talking about Minneapolis, where it's been ground zero for this current rebellion. They just voted to disband their police department entirely and to entirely rethink public safety. And so that is happening. These moves are happening. And so we have an opportunity to really throw down in Los Angeles County for what we're calling a Care First budget. And so we're talking about moving resources away from law enforcement, away from the sheriff's department in particular, away from a $3.5 billion murderous organization, medically neglectful organization. And if there are any doubts about that, all you have to do is check the records of court settlements where they pay millions of dollars a year of our resources that could go towards our well-being to settle cases for medical negligence, for wrongful death, for wrongful imprisonment that happens every year. The Los Angeles County is the leading cost. Los Angeles County Sheriff's is the leading cost of settlements every single year because of human rights violations, specifically against Black and brown people. And so we are calling for defunding of the Sheriff's Department in this current moment. That includes closure of Men's Central Jail, that includes funding the things that we know work, and we have the solutions. And that, again, is what makes this moment in LA different, is that prior to all this popping off in March, LA did something really important. Not only were we, Justice LA, Frontline Wellness Network, as a part of that coalition, stopped LA from spending $4 billion on a jail and a mental health jail, we also pushed them to approve 114 recommendations that are designed for alternatives to incarceration. And all of those things create a clear roadmap for what we can invest in. And it's everything from ending pretrial detention as we understand it now, to investing in housing, to investing in community-based responses to harm, to training up community health workers, to training up formerly incarcerated people to be health leaders, to training up families on how to meet their people's needs and their family members' needs, to creating alternatives to 911 and funding those things. And so that's what we're talking about. And we have this very unique opportunity in Los Angeles to get that cracking. And I'll talk about some of those opportunities and how you can plug directly into that next. But I want to offer Vita some time to jump in and talk about this as well.
Thank you, Mark. That was amazing. Dr. Amani?
You know, one of the first ways that Mark Anthony, came on this campus, and I really want to just acknowledge that you've been on this campus for at least, 4 years now, giving lectures to our students every year to keep them connected. And shout out to many of the students on this call, Jashawn and Kyla, Sana, yourself, right, who have been active, with you in this stuff. But one of the first issues that you came to this campus to talk about was the issue of bail, right? And, and the idea of like a pretrial detention, and the fact that I think it's almost 70% of people are incarcerated waiting, right, to find out if, without having been charged, right? Wait, simply because they cannot afford to not be there. Right. And so when you think then back again on this like institutional racism, and you do that historical kind of line through time, and you see that, anti-Black racism, specifically in the enslavement of people of African descent here in this country, how it's directly connected to the wealth of this country. Then you think back to then at this moment, and you look at the $1 Million Hoods and how it gets that name, that the hoods are the ones that are paying $1 million into the wealth of the city, right? When you think about the movement of money in these ways, you can't help but then think about how essentially what is being said when 70% of people are in pretrial detention who are incarcerated, that if you give us more money, we'll give you your freedom, right? Like that is essentially like what sits to the heart of that. So the idea of defunding the police is like, how do you eliminate this whole concept from society to begin with? And defunding the police is just one mechanism within the larger abolitionist vision, which is very important to highlight, a larger abolition vision of what then should the money go into, and how should that be organized, and how should that new opportunities, new economic privilege be distributed. The alternatives to incarceration that Frontline Wellness Group was a part of, and others, and I really encourage everyone here who is in science, medicine, health to go take a look at that document and all those recommendations. They have done the work of setting forward a community health system in LA. sometimes I wonder how COVID would have looked so different if that had been in place prior to this moment, especially because in the COVID context, we know that the organizations who have done so much of the vital work on the ground of supporting public health work without being recognized, without having those budgets, how precarious their existence is post this pandemic, simply because everyone's been pushed to a financial limit and then beyond more. So to think that like there is already a document in place that has been vetted throughout community, and and when we say inclusive of people who've been system impacted, right, formerly incarcerated, everybody needs to realize that mass incarceration has gone so everywhere that you are like, if not 1 degree, 2 degrees separated from somebody who's been system impacted, right? Which is really important to mention to also destigmatize that, But in that, thinking about that, then the Alternatives to Incarceration is our roadmap out and is part of that abolition vision here in Los Angeles. And then to also follow very closely the people's budget, which I know Black Lives Matter LA took a major leadership role in, to see how, the conversations around the people's budget connecting to this Justice LA document that Mark Anthony put forward, that there are a lot of opportunities for us right now to not stay in the theoretical, right? Or not to be kind of nervous and that, okay, we take this apart, but what's there? But that already the next steps have been laid out for us. And all that's being asked of us is for us to join it and to offer whatever input that we have along the way.
Thank you, Dr. Imani, for that. So the recent timely report released June 3rd, 2020 from the UCLA Center for the Study of Racism and Social Justice and CDU Department of Public Health on policing and the pandemic. What do you have to say about that report?
That report really came out of, and it happened the weekend, literally the Monday right after there was the protest that was called in Pan Pacific Park, right? And kind of all the, in collaboration with all the protests that had happened across the United States, but really out of the fact that people are letting you know that continuously targeting and killing Black people is no longer, has never been acceptable, but the tipping point has been reached, as the tipping point has been reached before. And then your response is to come out and to not only increase their chance of getting COVID through tear gas, through pepper spray, through rubber bullets and real bullets, right? Not only are you kind of increasing their chance of risk during a pandemic, but then you also bring in the military, right? At this moment to let them know that we are here to back up the police, because the police are the front line to protecting the property in certain places in Los Angeles. And that it is unacceptable for you to think that you're right, like that, that your life, right, should be prioritized over these priorities. So that Monday we came together and we connected both the history of policing, the systemic racism in policing, to the pandemic, drawing those connections. And in it, we we directly talk about some of our nervousness around contact tracing and our need that in public health that we know that it's a tool and that we know that we have to do something, especially because the economic health is being prioritized over people's health, right? But that we are nervous about this because we still exist in a white supremacist carceral state. So how is this gonna look? I just wanna take 1 second for folks who think that this can be kind of abstract, kind of like this fear, and draw our attention to an article that was written April 27th by Brandon Marshall and Abdullah Shapar. And in it, like in just the opening sentence with tons of links, and I'll get this to you guys to show, it talks about how Philadelphia Transit Police violently forced a man off a bus for not wearing a mask. How in New York, they raised the maximum fine from 500 to 1,000 for breaking social distancing rules, right? How we know when there's stop and frisk policies out of 40 people that had been detained under kind of trying to enforce public health, like whatever mandates, that 35 out of those 40 people had been Black. In Kentucky, judges were ordering people who tested positive for the coronavirus to be quarantined with an ankle monitor, right? In Florida, a judge ruled that people arrested for breaking quarantine can be held without bail. Yesterday, we were in a Know Your Rights meeting with the National Lawyers Guild, where people were asking questions around contact tracing and quarantine and these things. And it came out that in DC, they either they have or they're moving towards a policy that if you're COVID positive and you don't quarantine, that you can be subject to a type of misdemeanor. So, this is essentially where this press conference and this report came out of, knowing these histories, knowing the fights in the cities that are very important moments right now for drawing attention to so many things, and how public health, what we know is important to us can be weaponized against the very people that we are trying to, to protect.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amani. Everyone, I'd just like to let you know that we're probably going to be going until 1:15, so thank you for your patience and your time. Very well said, Dr. Amani. Towards the end, we'll be answering questions, so please write them in the chat box. Over to you, Mark. So what do we do moving forward with all the information that we've learned and discussed today? What are some things that all of us can do, whether we're students, staff, faculty, or even from home? How can we support?
So there's a lot of really exciting things that are going down. And, I'll say that, Bita and we have mentioned that organizations have been doing this work for a minute. And I know some of the folks who are on here have been part of those organizations, and just thank you for all your work. And so for folks who are not plugged into organizations, what I would say the first step is to get plugged in to an organization, get plugged into a campaign like Black Lives Matter's Budget LA, People's Budget effort right now, which is changing the landscape of Los Angeles in a very, really, really critical way. Join Justice LA and getting involved. And then specifically, the Frontline Wellness Network. And I think, what we are trying to do is really show folks that healthcare providers have a very real stake in this. Healthcare providers are here to really point out a lot of things that we're saying, not just historically, but in this very real moment. And so I'm going to give you 2 steps that you can take to plug in this very moment. Let me pull it up for you. So you can, you should see my screen at this point. Text us on our Frontline Wellness Network platform. And this is our number, 213-325-1649. This is our platform. This is how we get engaged. If you are interested in plugging into this work, text us. We will connect. We will throw down. The first thing you do is text Care Not Cages to that number, and you'll get a response from us. It's asking you to sign up with us, fill out our sign up form, so we know who you are. We have your contact information, and we can make sure on all the updates. And then help us get our Care First budget moved. At this point, like I said, Los Angeles County has yet to respond to the question of how it is going to defund the Sheriff's Department, how it is going to close jails if it could very realistically be closed right now, and how it's going to invest in public health solutions that are safer than sheriffs, that are safer than jails. And we have produced that analysis in the report that I shared with you before. You can feel free to read that report. It's on our website. But also, if you text the Care First budget to our number, you should get a link to our budget survey. And we want to hear from you. What do you think the county should spend its resources on? Do you think it should be housing, healthcare, law enforcement? If that's what you think, throw it down, put it in there. Let's talk about it. But we're trying to assess as many people as possible. And we have a hunch that the many people who've been throwing down on this work are not only aligned with us, but the needle has moved in such a way that more and more people see that we have to make serious steps towards defunding systems of harm and funding systems that sustain, dignify, Black life and well-being. And so those are two things you can do to get plugged in. And next Tuesday, we are going to be mobilized into the County Board of Supervisors. It is a digital meeting, and we need your help. They are entertaining the idea of trying to implement certain reforms, reforms like refining the use of force policies or creating mandates for law enforcement officers to intervene. You should know that so many reforms have been tried in Los Angeles County. All you have to do is look up Citizens Commission on Jail Violence, and you will see thorough analysis of the Sheriff's Department and how many reforms were supposed to be implemented, that were tried, that were either rejected, implemented, figured out how to navigate around. And so, again, we are beyond reforms at this point. We have to move resources away from the things that are taking our lives and into the things that are sustaining our lives. And so we need your support coming out on Tuesday to help us slow down and push back against those agendas and push a Care First budget.
Thank you, Mark. If you'd like, you could email me that information, and then we can have it for everyone, just in case. We do have a lot of questions right now. So should we start going over the questions? Okay. So the first question is, some have said abolitionism is an ideology of ending a particular social injustice, but has been seen as weak in proposing rebuilding rather than ending social injustice. What replaces defunding police? What is proposed to the current system? Should we talk more about a new police order and what this should be, and not just defunding police?
So, I mean, what I would say to this is that real solutions exist. Real solutions are being utilized. They have yet to be invested in and have yet to be scaled up. And so, again, I would point any and everyone to the county report, Care First, Jail Last, as the starting place. And you can see what that report does is it traces the arc of someone through the criminal legal system. And it says it breaks it off into 6 sections and says at every single point in which someone is moving through that system, here's how you get them out. Here are the investments we need to make sure they are not in there. And one of the key principles of that system and of that proposal that was already approved by Los Angeles County, that came from a year's worth of work of people on the ground, and that was produced and approved by a consensus model amongst every major systems leader in Los Angeles County. One of the pillars of it is reducing police contact. We have to reduce police contact. And the way you do that is invest in housing, invest in urgent care centers, invest in people getting jobs, invest in transportation. And so we have the concrete solutions are there. We just have to push the county to invest in it.
Thank you.
I want to add to that, the issue of safety and accountability. And I see that, kind of went through the questions fast, but there was somebody else who's also asking about what does accountability mean for the police who kill folks? And of course, here in Los Angeles, that's around a lot of the organizing to push DA Jackie Lacey to actually, to charge, right? Police officers, but accountability and safety are a part of the abolitionist vision. And I think that this is one of the things that people get nervous about. So you're like, okay, you're going to defund this, but what about safety, right? Safety, crime is something that we construct, but safety in terms of protecting each other is something that we know and that we have always done. One of the slides that had come up before, you don't have to screen share it right now, Sana, but one of the slides that had come up was out of a YJC report that had analyzed what could happen if you had defunded the police budget. And I think this report is maybe almost 10 years old, but in it, they take a police officer and how much money goes into that and kind of what that person's orientation is. And they compared to it a intervention worker, a peace builder, somebody from the community who has already existing relationships. And this is not community policing, right? That's another conversation. But that, that a peace builder from the community, right? Like both in terms of how they're dressed, how they orient themselves, like how the effectiveness of the person who doesn't have the gun, right, is so much more than the person who does, who's in a neighborhood, and by virtue of coming into that neighborhood with a gun, right, creates kind of all these other kind of collateral consequences. So, getting to Mark Anthony's point that there has been a vision and there has been so many solutions. I'm thinking now, and I think a documentary was made, I have pandemic brain, I'm not remembering very well, but if somebody else here does, the intervention in Chicago, the violence interrupters, I think it was, I believe also started, an epidemiologist played a very important role in it. And I'm forgetting that, but we have also had public health models of safety that have been alternative to, to this. So there's tons of examples, but I think the key word that Mark Anthony hit on is that they haven't been scaled up. They haven't been scaled up so people can get the confidence from it. And the accountability piece also is around when somebody's safety is violated, right? Like what happens? In an abolitionist vision, it also allows for people who have hurt somebody else to get accountability, to be able to perform their accountability, because it allows for them to also, through models of restorative justice or transformative justice, right, to be able to come to terms with what they have done and also account for it. So it's misleading to think that any of these visions don't think about safety or accountability within them.
Thank you, Dr. Amani. There's about 4 more questions. So I'm gonna try to limit it about a minute each so we can get to everyone. Having been an activist of the 60s, attended the March on Washington and many other activist movement activities, I was able to see some subtle change in opportunities for minorities. Do you feel we have arrived at the state of nation today is due to the complacency of the generations which came after? What do you see needs to be done so that this complacency does not occur again?
I think that we have to immediately call for a stop to any criminalization of protest. When I think about that moment to now, like after that moment is when mass incarceration built up. It was a direct also response to Black Power, right? And the fact that you saw so many people joining the Black Power movement as allies or in solidarity, because they understood that the gains that they were asking for were gains that would also benefit others, not to mention the fact that it was so disgusting and egregious, right, that the state would continue to target Black people. So, mass incarceration and everything that happened after the 60s was in reaction to that power, right? You can just go to COINTELPRO to see that kind of counterinsurgency argument and the ways that these movements were attempted to be undermined. When you think about that, and then the ways that the states in the 60s to now completely disinvested in social services, right? Moved from building schools to building prisons, moved from having counselors in school districts to having more police officers in school districts, then you can really see like the mechanisms and the systemic ways that complacency was put in. So I think at this moment, if we really want to prevent that from happening, we have to, as much as we can, leverage our power so that the protesters are not criminalized and that they're not retaliated against from this moment on.
And I would just add, I think part of what we have to interrogate is the narratives that took place in the wake of the gains that happened in the 60s and 70s, right? And so, I think it's really almost poetic that a couple of days ago, the show Cops was actually canceled, right? This is a show that's been on my entire life, literally. And when we talk about, again, the definition of politics is we're looking at a way in which a cultural production was used to generate a narrative that police should be the solution to social ills, but also some of the co-optation of some of the most powerful work during the 60s powerful work that was talking about self-determination, that was talking about community control of resources. Some of the co-optation looked like, oh, well, to the extent that police have problems, if we diversify those police departments, we will solve the issue, right? And we know LAPD is one of the most diverse law enforcement agencies in the country and the most murderous in the country, right? And so diversity is not the issue. You can change the face of whatever the institution is or the diversity quotas. What we are talking about is the outcomes, right? And I wouldn't say that there's complacency in generations that came after. I would say that that generation was trying to figure out and respond to the political project of demonizing and depressing those movements. And certainly the movements that we see now, Black Lives Matter, movements for Black lives, are multi-generational and significantly younger people who are calling on and connected to elders in this moment. And so we draw those lines and we're pushing forward saying we have to move past the co-opting narratives of our wins in those moments and continue to push for deeper transformative shifts now.
Thank you so much. Comparing data, most arrests have been made in one night across the country during early weeks of the protests than other significant historical events I can think of. Is this the case? And how can we include this in the historiography of mass incarceration in this country? I think basically, do you want me to repeat it?
No, I mean, I think the point that that's being brought up about kind of the state's response to the protesters, right? You know, one, it also speaks to the fear, right, that they have, right, to see people mobilize in this way. It's to, and that because we are doing historiographies of mass incarceration, you know, both locally and around the world, that, yeah, this moment will definitely be included in it as both a continuation and also a bit of a paradigm shift.
Okay. I'm going to go to the next question. Can you speak to the issue of arresting and convicting officers who are guilty of police brutality, wrongful death, wrongful imprisonment? Because no true reform can come about unless there is true accountability. I think we briefly discussed this, but would you like to add anything, either of you?
Yeah, I just think, you know, I think this question is a very important question. It's a really critical question. And Black Lives Matter members, Akili, who spoke at our action at the Sheriff's and at the Twin Towers on Saturday, made a really good point that the convictions are a form of accountability, but they're not the form of accountability, right? And we have to move from, and part of what abolition offers us is almost a litmus test to assess, are the solutions that we are pushing for solutions that reinforce the power of the system, or do they fundamentally shift power dynamics? And those are things that we really want to look at. And so we know that prosecutions of police officers, for some that is accountability, but we also know that they take a tremendous amount of effort. We know that they have not resulted in the stoppage of the rate of Black killings, and they still rely on the power of judges, DAs, courts, and reinforce those power dynamics. And so what we're saying in this moment, we have to divest legitimacy and power from those entities and reinvest them in the things that actually bolster our communities.
Thank you so much, Mark, Anthony, and Dr. Amani. So here are some of the resources that were mentioned in today's lecture. Did you want to talk about the resources at all?
Just to say that Miriam Kaba is a phenomenal organizer who's done really brilliant work on this question of abolition, and not just looking at the police side, but specifically what are the solutions that exist on the community side, and is actively building those things and supporting communities across the country, including in LA, in building those things. And then Ruthie Gilmore is, you know, very much a legend and a mentor to many of us in the abolitionist movement. Both of these articles were in the New York Times, which again speaks to the difference of this moment, where we are able to push abolition into a much more mainstream conversation. And so if you can check out those articles.
Thank you so much. Dr. Partlow?
Thank you very much, Sana, for guiding us through today's conversation. We really want to thank Dr. Amani and also Mark Anthony Clayton Johnson for all of the information that you shared with us today, for taking time to educate us. We really appreciate your time, and we hope that that really this is the first of many talks that we'll have with you as we continue to work together. We want to remind folks also, I know that you have seen, those of you at CDU, there is a protest, a peaceful protest rally that's going to take place today. I believe they're officially starting at 2, right? 2 o'clock. They're going to be meeting in front of the LSRNE building. So definitely we want to support. Also, some of you guys are joining and you'd like more information on programs that are housed in CDU's Department of Public Health. And specifically, we're going to be talking about our Bachelor's of Science in Public Health, but if you're interested in our Master's of Public Health, definitely you're invited to stay on the call as well. So again, if you'd like more information about our undergrad program in public health or our master's program in public health at CDU, please, we welcome you to stay on the call. We'll have some more information. Once again, we want to thank you guys for joining. We have another, can you go to the next slide, please? We want to encourage you all to save the date for July 15th, 2020. We'll be featuring a film screening in partnership with our Office of International Affairs called The Long Road Home. We will be sending this flyer out to you as there is a film trailer, but we'll be talking about social issues including domestic violence and depression and their impact on communities. Once again, thank you very much to everyone for joining. Thank you, Dr. Amani. Thank you very much, Mark Anthony. We appreciate your commitment and your work. And thank you to everyone. Thank you also to the UHI team. Take care.
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
It was great.
Stay tuned because Mark Anthony will be teaching again in the fall in some of our classes, holding an Abolition in Prison Industrial Complex 101 Community Mental Health. So we'll be publicizing that so you can join the classes at that time.
Awesome.
I will be there, definitely.
Yes, I will too.
I do want to say Cielo Sanchez, the new president of CDUSG, she is the one that is leading this protest at Drew. So if anyone can come by, please come support us. I will be there right now. I'm actually going to leave. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Again, if you would like more information, please stay on the call about our undergrad program and also our master's program in